So today we're going to talk about finding area of a triangle. I'm going to start on page 674. The formula for area of a triangle is area equals 1/2 times base times height. Sometimes you'll see it written as base times height divided by 2. They both get you the same answer. Sometimes it depends what kind of, if you're doing a calculator or if you're doing a paper pencil or what numbers you're given, either of these will get it to you. Okay, now let's talk about finding base and height. Base and height in a triangle will always be perpendicular. So sometimes the height will be a side, and sometimes the height will be in the middle or even outside because you're measuring between two things. So if I look at the example up top here, the base is the one that it sits on the bottom. That will always be a side. And then the height is the highest point to the base. It's perpendicular. It has that 90-degree right angle mark there. So I would multiply height and base and then divide by 2, or 0.5 times height times base, or 1/2 times height times base, however it is you're going to calculate. If I look at this example, the height here is part of the triangle. It's one of the sides. And the base is the one on the bottom that it sits on. They are perpendicular. Right? We're not given any measurements for this, but we are given a grid. So we're going to have to use that grid to count. Start at one of the corners. That's my 0. So the first line is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The base here is 6 units. And from that same point, I'll count up. This is 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. The height is 4. So they show you that they've done the 1/2 base height formula. We keep the 1/2. We replace B with 6 because that was our base. We replace H with 4 because that was our height. I would do 6 times 4 first and get 24, and then cut that in half and get 12, and your answer is 12 square units. If I was to count all the squares in here, it would be 12. Even if I had to take a half and swing it around here, and a little piece here and swing it around here, if I was to make full squares by matching them all up, it would be 12 full squares. Now, what happens when they give you the area and they ask you to find one of the missing measures? We're going to start with the formula. Here you can see they're using the BH over 2 divided by 2. Still a fraction, still a division sign, however you want to think about it. Replace in this what you know. So I'm told that the height is 6, and I'm told that the area is 24. So A becomes 24. B we don't know, so that's going to stay. H becomes 6. And 2 stays exactly as it is. All right, now how do we undo this? It's a little tricky. I'm going to divide last, so it's the first thing I'm going to undo. So let me double my 24. That'll give me 48. And then 48 equals something times 6. Well, 6 times 8, find that by division. So B must be 8. This is an 8 centimeter side. Okay. One of the other ways that you could do this, if you like the 1/2 times base times height formula, is do your 24 equals 1/2 times, I'm going to switch these around, commutative properly lets me do that, times 6 times B. Okay. I'm going to do this first, the 1/2 times 6. So I get 24 equals 3B. That might be a little bit easier for you than trying to undo, and what do I do? If this makes sense, go for it. If this makes sense, go for it. If you're comfortable with this and you just want to know the formula, go ahead and stop the video and then go to the bookwork that I've given you in the assignment. But I want to take another second and show you why it's 1/2. Okay, we've talked a lot about rectangles and parallelograms and base times height and length times width. So let's start with just a plain rectangle. If I was going to do the area of this, it would be length times width. If you think of it as a parallelogram, it's base times height. What happens if I cut it on the diagonal? What shapes have I made? 2 congruent triangles, exactly the same. If I was to rotate them, they sit right on top of each other, same size, same shape. So I took my length times width, or my base times height, and I cut it in half. So 1/2 times base times height is the area of this. It works for a square, which is, another type of rectangle or another type of parallelogram. We would think of this as base times height or length times width. And again, I can cut it in half. 2 congruent pieces, 1/2 times length times width, 1/2 times base times height. All right, but those were squares and rectangles. What about a parallelogram? Well, guess what? It works for this too. So this is our base times height. If I was to cut it on the diagonal, I get 2 congruent triangles, 1/2 times base times height.